I guess the question I want to ask you is this. I mean, let me give you a scenario. Hamza Tezortzis. Let's say I pretend I'll make a robot. I get a robot that's 5'10", you know,
10.5.
5'10.5", okay, with the 18-inch biceps, of course.
No.
You know, and the charming exact robot, and in fact we program it. We'll give it algorithms, so that the robot acts in exactly the same way as you act.
Yes.
So, in all intents and purposes, this robot is actually Hamza Tezortzis in terms of aesthetics, how it looks, how it acts. If I go ahead and put a knife through this robot or break the robot using a bat or whatever it is, have I killed Hamza Tezortzis 2.0, or have I damaged property?
You've damaged property. And probably the main reason you've damaged property is because I am not that robot. And even if you were to try and claim that the physical makeup of that robot was somehow identical to my physical makeup, you still haven't killed a human being, you've just killed a robot. Because the inner structure of that robot, if you use such a language,
Right.
does not produce inner subjective conscious experience.
So
There
you're
isn't,
saying-
there isn't a, what is it like for the robot, you know, to wake up on a Sunday morning and
Wow.
enjoy a gourmet coffee?
Right, so you're saying that if we just depend upon materialistic definitions...
Well, I would even argue that's not the best example to use,
Right.
but I know what you're trying to go here.
Yeah.
And what I would say here in the case of the robot is the robot essentially is based on algorithms,
Yes.
and as William Hasker said, that a robot as a computational thing is basically just an extension of human rationality and consciousness, right? It doesn't have it, it's an extension of human rationality and
Because it needs an
consciousness. It needs an input,
It needs an
absolutely. Not just that, one would also argue, if you follow Professor Sell and others, that the robot itself, all it can do is just manipulate symbols.
Right.
Syntax.
Right.
It can't. Sorry, it could just manipulate symbols, right?
Right.
It can't manipulate meaning, syntax. So there's a difference between symbols and syntax, right? It could manipulate essentially zeros and ones, which is the base of all
Binary code.
your binary code, and you have more complexity after that. But it could just manipulate that, but it cannot attach meaning onto those symbols. Because you could even train a computer to believe yes is no and no is yes from that point of view. Yeah. So one would argue
That's
that
a good point.
Yeah,
Can you just repeat that point again?
well, you could train a computer, or
Right.
you could input into a computer that yes means no and no means yes.
Right.
But you could do that with a human being too, one would argue.
Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make here
There's
is
no meaning.
that they cannot attach meaning to the symbols. It's just a manipulation of symbols, right?
And it wouldn't be a valid inference to suggest that potentially this robot has the same first-person subjective experience as you do, that has consciousness.
Of course you can, because look, maybe this is not a great example to use. Let's use the example of maybe even a zombie. Yeah, because a zombie is biological, right? A zombie is like soulless, isn't it? It's supposed to kill things, right? Say we had a zombie version of you, right? Does that zombie version of you have feelings? Right? Zombies are supposed to be these things that don't feel, they just attack and eat and kill, right? They have no inner subjective conscious states. They're just like almost this in between this realm of consciousness and unconsciousness. They're like ghost-like, but they're you. They got your biological makeup. They have an intact brain, a heart, the physicality is there. So from a zombie point of view, does that zombie have inner subjective conscious experiences?
No.
Well, probably not, right? So what we would say is here is, why are we saying this? Because there is something fundamentally different about inner subjective conscious states and just physical stuff.
Yeah.
There is something fundamentally different. This is not about an epistemic gap. It's not about a knowledge gap that, oh, we just don't know. You know, we don't know how the physical stuff works in order for us to have inner subjective conscious states.
Right.
It's not just about knowledge. Yes, there is an epistemic gap that we don't know. We could discuss that later. But fundamentally, what's more crucial here is there is something ontologically different. What does that mean? That the nature and source of these two things are different.
Okay.
Let me break it down, bro.
Please do.
You have a brain.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Yeah. You have a brain. So we take your brain, and there are neurochemical pathways. As a neuroscientist, for example, I'm looking at these neurochemical pathways and I'm correlating them, because neuroscience is basically...
That's what Talis did, didn't he? He was a neurologist or something like that, wasn't he? MRI guy.
He knew, if I'm correct, he knew the neuroscience, and he's also a philosopher.
Yeah.
And he's an atheist, by the way.
Yeah.
But he doesn't believe in this physicalist understanding
Yeah,
of
he
human
doesn't.
being.
Yeah.
He finds it quite disheartening, actually.
Yeah, he does, yeah.
So from that point of view, say you have a brain, and we map out all the neurochemical pathways in your brain, and we correlate it, because neuroscience is the science of correlations mainly, yeah? And we correlate the neurochemical pathways to, for example, eating a banana on a Sunday morning, yeah? Watching the sunrise or something, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
And you have an inner subjective conscious state, and you describe that state as wonderful, spiritual, mystical, tasty, sweet, nice, yeah?
Right.
You got all those descriptions, and what they say is, that neurochemical stuff that's happening, those neurochemical happenings, is his subjective conscious state. They're making it identical to his subjective conscious state. Now what neuroscience does, and you may hear lots of things in the popular media, online world, that, you know, they found this new kind of neurochemical pathway or happenings, and they're correlating it to this inner subjective conscious state. They're saying that now, that neurochemical happening is identical to the subjective experience. That is a big problem,
right? Because
neuroscience hasn't proven that. What they've done, they're just bringing the assumption into play.
Right.
All they're saying is, they're saying it's identical, but that term itself, that statement, it is identical to, they would have to prove it, because that's exposing a philosophical assumption.
Right.
Because neuroscience, because people think neuroscience is philosophically free. There is no philosophy-free science, just like Dan Dennett said. There's no philosophy-free science. You're always going to have certain assumptions if you study the philosophy of science, which you have to use and adopt in order to have your science. So in the case of neuroscience, a key assumption of neuroscience is physicalism.
Which is?
Physicalism is the philosophical approach to the mind or to consciousness that basically says that inner subjective conscious experience can be reduced in some way to physical stuff.
Okay.
That is a philosophical assumption.
Materialism.
In other words, they use materialism as well. In the literature, physicalism and materialism are used they're interchangeable, but they do have historical meanings that are slightly different. And materialism used to mean that you could reduce things to physical stuff. Physicalism means that it doesn't necessarily have to be reduced to physical stuff, but it could be reduced to physical processes. But that's neither here or there. They're using it interchangeably now, yeah? So physicalism, what they're saying now, physicalism, is a philosophical approach to consciousness that is basically saying that who you are, your conscious states, especially your phenomenal states, your inner subjective conscious states, can be reduced to physical stuff or processes.
Let me see if I get this right.
And that's why neuroscience, you have to bring this to the audience, because people miss that. Say, oh look, there's this new study that comes along, they found 40 megahertz in the brain or something, there's some kind of frequency and some kind of happenings, and they correlated to you having a coffee, therefore they found the basis of consciousness. Hold on a second, my friend. Let's turn down the kind of, you know, neuromania, as Tallis says. This is neuromania. Let's turn the knob down a bit. All they've shown is a correlation. They haven't shown that the 40 megahertz, for example, is identical to that subjective experience. To make that claim, you now have to expose your philosophical assumption that physical stuff is identical to inner subjective conscious states, and that is the problem.
Let me see if I get this right, and you correct me if I'm wrong. Okay? Is what you're saying as follows. Say, for example, I get someone, I'm not sure if this is even possible, but let's say I get someone, right? Put them under an MRI scanner. Get them to eat, or speak to them, yeah? I'll say to them, I'll give them keywords which will trigger certain emotions. For example, saying something which has emotive resonance to them, right? And the scientist in the MRI room, he says, okay, well here, when you say this word, these areas in the brain are, these neurological pathways are triggered, or this part of the brain is triggered. We can see that this part of the brain is triggered. Now, obviously, from a scientific perspective, we don't have a problem with that.
No, not at all.
No issue. Now, the issue you're saying you have, and we have, is that actually you can't say, just because that part of the brain is, let's say, now aroused, or it's now...
there's neurochemical firing.
There's neurochemical firing. You can't say that is
the basis for subjective
your let's say, for example, love. You can't say love is reduced to a chemical bundle.
No, that's extremely reductionist, because there's other parts of the brain that are firing as well. And in different studies, there are so many contradictions in neuroscience. But the interesting thing here is this. Say you prove that is the basis of love. Does that now mean that is love? Do you see my point?
Right.
No, it doesn't mean it is love.
Right.
It could just be a physical manifestation, it could be part of the process, it could be something that allows love to happen, but it doesn't mean it is love. It doesn't mean it is the experience of love.
Yeah, it's not the
That's
experience.
the first point.
Yeah.
The second point is, even if you were to claim that it is love, you still haven't solved the hard problem, because I would ask you, right, what is it for that person to fall in love? What is it like for them? And maybe give you more descriptions. Then you just ask those descriptions, what is it like for those people to have those descriptions? Words are vehicles to meaning. Meaning is a representation of subjectivity. You could still never find out what it's like for Muhammad Hijab to fall in love. Right?